What's up, my dudes, and welcome back to another adventure in the Panda Chronicles. On today's adventure, we're going to be talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His parents are Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. He is said to be a very energetic and happy child until he had surgery on a double hernia. After the surgery, his personality and his character just did a 180. He went from a very nice, energetic, and sweet little kid to being very withdrawn and just off. He wasn't himself. He wasn't as nice. He wasn't sweet anymore. He just kind of seemed to distance himself from everybody and everything after the surgery. Jeffrey Dahmer claims that his urge to kill and his necrophilia started at the age of 14, but a lot of people suggest that it was the fighting of his parents constantly, and then finally when they had a divorce, it just sped everything up. That is what made him take that final step into turning his thoughts into actions. That was the final straw that broke the camel's back, and he snapped after that. In high school, Jeffrey Dahmer developed a very bad alcohol addiction to the point where he ended up dropping out of his first semester of college. But after Jeffrey Dahmer had dropped out of college, his father insisted on him joining the army. So in December of 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer enlisted into the army. And shortly thereafter, he had been stationed at a base in Germany. He eventually got discharged from the army in 1981. Some people say it's because of his drinking problems. Some say that he just wasn't stable mentally for it. After being discharged from the Air Force, Dahmer returned to Ohio to live with his father. But he got arrested for drunken disorderly conduct, and his father put his foot down and said he had enough. So his father sent Jeffrey Dahmer to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. But his alcohol problem did not stop there. It actually got worse, and he ended up being arrested the year after for indecent exposure. He was arrested again in 1986 when two young boys said that Jeffrey Dahmer was touching himself in front of them. He received a 1-year probation sentence. Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men between 1978 and 1991. He was very careful in who he chose to be a victim. He always chose people who wouldn't be missed. People who looked like they were gonna snap, or people who looked like they were very poor. Just people who did not look like they were going to be missed by loved ones, or people wouldn't notice them being gone. He would often lure them to his house and promises of money or sex. He ended up strangling them, and then he would have sex with them, and then he would keep some of their body parts in the refrigerator and freezer and take pictures as souvenirs. Dahmer's first murder happened right after he graduated high school. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. While his parents were out of town in June of 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer and Stephen Hicks were very drunk. They were just talking on the couch, just chilling, and when Stephen Hicks decided that it was time to go and he had had enough and he just didn't want to be there anymore, that's when Jeffrey Dahmer started to get violent. Jeffrey Dahmer tried to stop him from leaving. He grabbed his arm, told him to stay, have a couple more drinks, but Stephen said, "Look, I really have to go." So when Stephen turned around to walk out the door, Jeffrey Dahmer grabbed a barbell and struck him over the head. Jeffrey Dahmer then dismembered him, put him in trash bags, and buried him in the backyard of his parents' home. He would later come back, dig up the body, crush the bones with a sledgehammer, and take the bones to a wooden ravine and scatter them. It wasn't until 1987 that Dahmer took his second victim. Stephen, is it Taomi or Toomey? I'm gonna butcher these names, I do apologize. They checked into a hotel room and got very drunk. Jeffrey states that he does not remember anything that happened. He remembered going to the hotel room, pouring drinks, and then he woke up with Stephen dead. He then proceeded to go and buy a suitcase and dismember Stephen's body, and he proceeded to touch himself while looking at the corpse before disposing of his remains. It was even stated that one of the hotel staff even helped move the suitcase with Stephen's body in it. Jeffrey Dahmer would go on to kill 2 more people before his grandmother finally got fed up with his drunken activities. always coming home late and being loud. She just couldn't take it anymore, and finally in 1988, she kicked him out of her house. In September 1989, Dahmer had an encounter with a 13-year-old boy. That resulted in charges of sexual exploitation and second-degree sexual assault for Dahmer. He pled guilty and claimed that the boy appeared to be older than what he really was. While awaiting sentencing in his sexual assault case, March 1989, he lured, drugged, strangled, sodomized, photographed, dismembered, and disposed of Anthony Sears. On trial in May 1989, Dahmer went on a whole speech about how this was the turning point of his ways. He learned his mistakes, he was gonna do better, and everything. His defense also argued that he needed treatment, not to be in jail. The judge agreed and sentenced him to 1-year prison sentence, day release, which meant during the day he could go to work, but at a certain time he had to be back at the prison for the night, as well as a 5-year probation sentence. Over the following 2 years, Dahmer's victim count accelerated. It went from 4 to 17. He started experimenting with ways of disposing of them, so he tried doing the acid and seeing if everything melted, and he even got to the point of saving certain parts of them and then eating them. Dahmer also experimented with his victims when they were still alive. He would perform lobotomies, drill holes into their skull, and inject them with muriatic acid. On May 27, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbor, Sandra Smith, called the police as she saw a naked Asian boy running down the street. When the police got there, Dahmer said that the boy was his 19-year-old lover. They believed Jeffrey Dahmer's word because Jeffrey Dahmer lived in a low-class African-American community, and with it being back in the day, they chose to trust Jeffrey Dahmer's word instead of the boy. The boy was actually 14 years old, and he ended up being the brother of the 13-year-old boy that Jeffrey Dahmer had faced sexual exploitation charges on. The police escorted Dahmer and the boy home, not wanting to get in the way or a fight with the homosexual community. Like I said, back in the day, that stuff was not known about. Like, a lot of people didn't accept it as much as today. So a lot of people are still weirded out by that fact. So they were like, oh, I'm gonna let them do their thing. That's weird. But today, it's normal and everybody's okay with it. Well, not everybody, but most people's okay with it. The police, when they got to Dahmer's home, did a courtesy look, which means they just kind of walked around from room to room. They didn't really look at anything. And after the police left, Dahmer killed that boy. If the police had just looked a little harder, if they would have just opened the fridge or opened the freezer that he had, or just looked around harder, that little boy could still be alive today. Dahmer was finally arrested on July 22nd, 1991. 2 Milwaukee police officers were led to Dahmer's house by a 32-year-old African-American man named Tracy Edwards. He was wandering around the streets, shirtless, with handcuffs dangling from his arm. He told the police that a weird dude had drugged him and put him in handcuffs. When they arrived at Dahmer's apartment, he calmly stated that he would get the keys for the handcuffs. Tracy said that Dahmer had threatened him with a knife, which was in the bedroom. So an officer walked to the bedroom to look around to see if the knife was still there. When the police officer walked into the bedroom, he found Polaroids on the nightstand of dismembered bodies. He picked up the Polaroids and was looking through them, and he stated that he looked at the photograph and then looked around and said, oh my god, I'm in the same room as these photos are taken. And he yelled for his partner in the kitchen to get him, and then he was finally subdued. When police came in to finally search his apartment, there was a head in the refrigerator and 3 more heads in the freezer. They also found jars full of skulls and genitalia, as long as Polaroids to document what he was doing. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial began in January of 1992. Since Dahmer's majority of victims were African American, there was a huge racial tension. So the courthouse and everybody else had to raise security. They even put 8-foot tall glass wall between Dahmer and the actual court people. One of the jurors on Jeffrey Dahmer's trial was African American, and he got very, very, very upset very quickly, but it was contained and short-lived, and they took him away and brought someone else in his place. Jeffrey Dahmer's dad and stepmother were with him throughout the entire trial. Jeffrey Dahmer first pled not guilty, even though when he was interrogated by the police, he confess to every single murder. He gave details and descriptions that only he would know that made the officers very, very, very uncomfortable. He eventually changed his statement and said that he was guilty, but he was guilty by insanity. His defense attorney agreed and gave the gruesome details of the murders, saying only someone insane could do something like this. The jury decided and agreed with the prosecutors that he was in fact sane and guilty for all counts. So on February 15th, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, and a 16th term was added onto his sentence in May. It only took the jurors 10 hours to declare him guilty, and it's like a statement saying like, oh well, the longer they're in there, the more guilty you are. Dahmer was allegedly okay with prison life. He adjusted very well. He was separated from the other inmates. That was because, you know, of the racial tension that would be in the prison. But finally, he convinced the prison warden that it was okay for him to be with other inmates. So he was finally moved with other inmates, and while he was in prison, he wrote letters back and forth to his dad. His dad got him on religion, so he started reading the Bible and praying in church and stuff like that, and he finally convinced the warden at Columbia Correctional Institution to allow him to allow him to be baptized by the local pastor. He ended up confiding a lot in the pastor, and the pastor said that he started to change his ways. He said that Jeffrey Dahmer ended up being a really good friend of his, and Jeffrey Dahmer wanted to be better. He wanted to do better. On November 28th, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was assigned to work with two other inmates, Christopher Scarver and Jesse Anderson. The prison guards that were supposed to watch them left and shortly returned to find Jeffrey Dahmer and Jesse Anderson have been severely beaten with a barbell by Christopher Scarver. Now, it was later stated that Scarver did it because he was so disturbed by the horribly terrifying images of his crimes. He was so disturbed by the fact of what he did and eating them that he just snapped, and the fact that Jesse and Jeffrey were constantly bullying Christopher. So it was stated that approximately 1 hour after his injuries, Jeffrey Dahmer did die, and Jesse Anderson died a couple days later. I think that is so ironic because Jeffrey Dahmer killed his first victim by beating him to death with a barbell, and Jeffrey Dahmer so happened to get beaten by a barbell and pass away. Also stated that Jesse had defensive wounds on his hands and arms, but Jeffrey Dahmer had none. And they were in the workroom, so he saw him coming, like he knew he was coming, but he didn't put up a fight. He just let it happen to him. I can't imagine finding all of those body parts in someone's freezer and refrigerator, and then having to interview them and ask them, what happened? What did you do? Like, why did this happen? Sitting in the same room across from someone who had heads in their refrigerator and were cooking pieces of human beings. I just got chills. It is a different level of fucked up. It is terrifying to think that he got away with this for so long, that because of the way he picked out his victims, he knew he wasn't gonna get caught. So he knew the steps to take to get away with it, which is sad, because if the police with the little boy had just searched a little harder, or if one of those boys had a friend or a family member or just someone to say, hey, I haven't seen them in a while, it is crazy. I don't know. It's a different level of fucked up. I don't know how, but I guess we'll never know. Alright guys, that's it for me today in this adventure. So stay tuned, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below for more content. And I will see you guys in the next adventure. Bye! Wisconsin.